What's up, everybody, and welcome into College Basketball Recruiting Weekly. And this week's show has got a certain theme to it because it is NBA All-Star Weekend out in Salt Lake City, and we're going to have a similar type theme on this show. We're going to start with a look back at some of this year's All-Stars and where they were in high school. Some of them were already nationally ranked five-star prospects, and some of them were way under the radar, illustrating there's more than one way to get to that final destination. Then we're going to look at the Rising Stars Challenge. That's the game with the best rookies and second-year NBA players. We're going to talk about which teams did the best on draft night to get those prospects. Again, draft night, everybody assigns grades, but you don't know what's going to happen. Well, now, a year and a half down the road, we can tell you who did the best on draft night. Last but not least, we are going to look forward to next year's draft and try and project who the next NBA All-Stars might be. It's All-Star Weekend in Salt Lake City, and that means the very best players on the planet are all under the same roof. Well, some of us have been watching these players for a long time, and so to trace the roots of this year's NBA All-Stars, I'm going to bring in my 24/7 sports colleagues, National Basketball Director Eric Bossi and National Recruiting Analyst Travis Branham. Fellas, what is going on?
How's it going?
Nothing much, man. How are you?
I'm great. So, all right, we're going to start with this. We're going to start with Jason Tatum, arguably maybe an MVP candidate this year. But, Ibas, this is someone you have been watching for a long time. What was he like early on in high school?
Jason Tatum was awesome. From the very beginning, you could see that the guy had star potential and big-time future written all over him. I went to see him the very first time. It was either his first or his second varsity game at Chaminade, and his overall skill level, just feel for the game, everything, maturity were just off the charts. And that continued through, and he ended up ranked number 3 pretty much universally in that class. And what I always loved about him is it really kind of fueled him to see guys like either a Josh Jackson or a Harry Giles ranked ahead of him. Now, of course, he's ended up on top, but a story that always sticks with me is a couple days after he was drafted, Jason was back in St. Louis hanging out at the Nike Elite 100 high school basketball camp. And I'm like, Jason, you just got drafted 2 nights ago. Shouldn't you be out there partying, living it up? And he looks at me and just deadpans, no, I had to let you know the NBA ranked me higher than you did, Bossi.
Well played, Mr. Tatum. All right, we're going to go to another guy. And Travis, I know this is someone you watched quite a lot of. Anthony Edwards making his All-Star debut, having a terrific season for the Timberwolves. What was it about his high school journey that really resonated with you?
He was one of the more polarizing evaluations. He was originally a member of that 2020 recruiting class, an absolutely loaded class, which we saw guys of Jalen Green and Evan Mobley decided to reclassify to that 2019 class. During that time, he showed to be the top prospect. Now, not the top player. There were other guys that were head and shoulders above him at the time. But when you looked at long-term potential, he was just oozing with upside and explosive talent. But the biggest thing that got people caught up on him was particularly in his competitive nature. There's a lot of times he'd go out and get blown out and lose games, but just the overall talent. And when you take into the consideration the things he had to deal with off the court up to that point, there's just so much to be tapped into. And really, we're seeing it now and just the immense growth in his leadership abilities on and off the floor for the Timberwolves.
All right, now speaking of incredible growth, Donovan Mitchell, I mean, the player he was in high school is almost not even comparable to the player he is now. In high school, he was a nationally ranked prospect, but the 3rd highest prospect on his Brewster Academy team. Number 1, Jalen Adams, who went on to UConn. Number 2, Justin Simon, who went on to Arizona. And the national analyst who was closest to Brewster Academy that year was this guy. My bad. So here's what I'll say. The jump that Donovan Mitchell made in his 2 years at Louisville was beyond anything anyone could have expected. In high school, he was an exceptionally high-character young man and one of the most explosive and violent athletes in the country, but relatively unskilled. And I know that sounds almost crazy, seeing the types of shots and plays he makes at the NBA level now. But the gains he made in 2 years at Louisville under Rick Pitino, absolutely off the charts. I remember talking to Mike Schmitz about it. Of course, he's now the assistant GM at the Portland Trail Blazers. And we just never seen a progression like that. And That's one of the reasons why he's evolved into arguably one of the most dynamic guards in today's NBA. So last but not least, we're going to talk about another guard, De'Aaron Fox. Now, De'Aaron Fox was many people considered to be one of the best point guards in his national recruiting class, but Lonzo Ball was the one who captivated the nation. Trav, you were a fan of De'Aaron real early on. What did you like about him?
First and foremost, his competitive nature. This kid, every single time out that you went and watched him play, he brought it on both ends of the court. And then when you take into consideration his absolute speed, this is a kid that was a blur on the court, could get to his left hand and get downhill any single time he wanted to, but was also a bit of an underrated passer, a guy who got everybody else involved, and somebody that really his teammates rallied around. He had a lot of leadership qualities about him, and I remember going to the UCLA-Kentucky game when UCLA came into Lexington, and De'Aaron gave Lonzo everything he possibly could. And from that point on, to me, that was a head-to-head matchup that we talked about for the rest of the season. And De'Aaron kind of got the short hand of things, I guess, right there. And Lonzo ended up going up higher in the draft, but it was obviously a clear miss. We were talking about one that's now named an All-Star and another who's found himself traded multiple times, and still he's having a successful career, but not what everybody expected.
Well, if you are a fan of the NBA draft or college basketball, maybe your favorite part of All-Star Weekend is the Rising Star Challenge, because it has the best rookies and sophomores in the NBA. Now, one of the things that happens on NBA draft night is everybody throws around their grades. They grade the draft, who had the best draft. Well, we don't really know yet, do we? Because you've got NBA GMs doing what they think is right. Now, almost 8 months later, we have an idea of who had the best drafts, at least so far. Still plenty can change, but we are going to re-rank those draft classes on 247sports.com, and we are going to discuss. Now I'll bring back in Eric and Travis. Now, fellas, I regraded everybody's draft, and I want to get your take on my grade. So you tell me what you think about this. The best draft in my mind, I was at this very table on draft night, and we were all sitting here expecting Jabari Smith to be the top pick in the draft. Woj had tweeted it, which means it's a virtual lock. And then something crazy happened, and Paolo Banchero ends up going number 1 in the draft. Right now, that seems like a stroke of genius for the Orlando Magic, because in my mind, he's the runaway winner for the Rookie of the Year. And so Orlando Magic have to have a top grade in terms of assessing last year's NBA draft. Any quick thoughts on that, fellas?
No doubt. I think they went along and did something that nobody was expecting, and it's worked out for them. They've got a cornerstone of their franchise for years to come, and a guy that looks like he's going to be not relegated to the futures game for very much longer. You know, he in my mind, he probably should be in the main All-Star game and is going to play in several of them before his time is done. So what a great pick by the Magic.
Yeah, I think you make a heck of a point there. If there were 15 guys on each roster, I think he very well could have made the All-Star game. Now, the other narrative about last year's draft was there was a big top 5. Everybody was talking about the draft starts at 6. Well, the Indiana Pacers had the 6th pick. They took Benedict Mathurin out of Arizona, and it's turned out to be what looks like a brilliant move, because he's emerged coming off the bench, showing his athleticism, showing his shooting. And the other thing the Pacers did, their 2nd-round pick, they took Andrew Nembhard. Now, both of these guys have had a little bit of a rookie wall issue in the last couple of weeks, but I think a lot of that has to do with Tyrese Halliburton going out of the lineup. But in my mind, the Indiana Pacers also had one of the best drafts of the 2022 draft. Travis, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And just talking about Benedict Mathurin, me and you were talking about it, I think, just last week. Going back to the topic of immense growth as a kid that's made an incredible amount of development over the past 3 to 4 years of his career. So all credit to him. This kid has put in the work and the time, and it's paying off.
Now, one narrative from draft night that has stayed consistent is the great job that Troy Weaver and the Detroit Pistons did. Obviously, the Pistons are not having a great season. Cade Cunningham out with an injury. But Jaden Ivey, while some rookies are hitting the wall, he's continuing to get better seemingly with each month in the league. He's stuffing all columns of the stat sheet. He's showing that explosive athleticism. And the fact that Cunningham is not in the lineup really allowing him to have the ball in his hands and play through some mistakes. They also traded for Jalen Duren that night, another guy who has continued to get better as the year goes on. He's especially young for a rookie, averaging a double-double since he's been put in the starting lineup. So, Ebas, back to you. I don't think there's any way we can argue with the fact that Detroit had a great draft night.
No doubt. And I think Jaden Ivey is not something that is really surprising anyone. I don't think there are many questions about what he was going to do, but I really think the Duren pick is what stands out to me because he was a guy that everyone saw the physical tools, the raw athleticism, and the way he looks. I mean, he may be one of the youngest players in the NBA, but he sure doesn't look it. But there were a lot of questions about his skill, about his feel for the game, and things of that nature coming out of Memphis, especially having skipped a year of high school to do so. And he's thriving right now. The guy is like, he's especially in Detroit of all places. What a throwback guy like to the bad boys. He's just this mean, aggressive rebounder. And, not saying he's Dennis Rodman or Ben Wallace or anything like that, but in Detroit, they appreciate those, just gnarly dudes who like to get in there and get physical. And Duren has been way more than anyone could have expected in his rookie year.
It's interesting. They've got Isaiah Stewart there as well. They just traded for James Wiseman. How they are going to play all those big guys, I have no clue, but they certainly have a lot of young talent up front. Now, on draft night, Detroit was widely praised as the winner of the draft. The team that was widely criticized on draft night was the New York Knicks. As can be the case, I think the immediate media reaction turned out to be a little short-sighted because what we came to realize later is New York was clearing cap space. They moved their draft picks as they dangled them in order to get off the Kemba Walker contract. And once they did that, that created the salary cap space to go out and get Jalen Brunson. We talked about how Banchero could have been a snub for the All-Star game. I think Jalen Brunson was definitely a snub for the All-Star game. Julius Randle got in, but Brunson has been terrific for the Knicks this season. And in retrospect, he was only able to get to New York because of what they did on draft night. So while that wasn't necessarily the headline-grabbing thing to move off your picks, I think you have to retroactively grade what New York did on draft night as an A. Trav, what do you think?
Yeah, just talking about Donovan Mitchell earlier and how you guys underranked him out of high school. Jalen Brunson goes into the second round. So there's 30-plus teams right there that really undervalued him. And just 2-3 years later down the line, look at him. We're already talking about him being an all-star snub. Absolute phenomenal basketball player.
No doubt about that. Ebas, did you see how he did the whole you guys thing there, just pointing out that he wasn't in the group when that happened? We noticed that. We noticed that. All right. All right. This week's Draftable Spotlight, we're going to keep the theme the same, and we are going to ask who's got a chance to be the NBA All-Stars out of this upcoming draft class. Now, let's get this out of the way. Victor Wembanyama, Scoot Henderson, they are the top of this list, but we are going to focus on college basketball players first and foremost. So I'm going to bring my colleagues back in here, and we are going to talk about the best that college basketball has to offer. Ebas, I will put you up first. Which college basketball player do you think has a chance to be an NBA All-Star down the road?
I'm going to go ahead and put on my Captain Obvious hat here and go with Brandon Miller of Alabama. He's been hands down the best freshman in the country, the leading freshman scorer. He's leading a team that entered the week, the #1 team in the country, a legitimate Final Four contender, based largely on the play of their freshmen, with him leading the way. And also just because his game seems to like it's going to translate really well to the NBA. He's got positional size. He does exactly what you want from a big, long shooter out on the wing. And I think we're seeing more and more as the season goes by that he's a little bit better athletically than people gave him credit for. He's a better playmaker than people realize. He gets on the glass. He just does so many things and seems to really be comfortable in his own skin right now that if I had to peg a guy in a class where I don't think any of us are overly excited about potential all-star type talents, Brandon Miller would certainly be my guy.
And I think the point that is relevant to our previous discussion, we talked about the jump Donovan Mitchell made in college. Well, the jump that Miller is making in college, I'll just speak for myself. I did not expect him to shoot the ball like this from behind the three-point line. He's also rebounding the ball. I mean, he's made more gains than anyone could have imagined. People forget he was on that same Brad Beal elite team with Nick Smith, who finished the class as the top-ranked prospect. Still has a chance to be a lottery pick, although we haven't seen him be healthy. Trav, you have a bit of an outlier pick here for a potential all-star in this coming up draft. Who you got?
Yeah, it's obviously based on a lot of potential, but I'm going with Cam Whitmore. He's a very young prospect, young for this class. And not only is he young and early in his development from that sense, but also he missed 2 years essentially of high school. So he is very early in the stages of his development. He's still playing catch up to many of his peers. And when you look across the board in the NBA and just across the world, he is in the top 1% of the top 1% of athletes. He's extremely explosive. He plays with a motor, and when you give him more spacing, he's going to continue to improve and develop. And I think what he can do on the court is really going to continue to shine through. And he's also continuing to make strides as a shooter. So love the potential and what Cam Whitmore can be, especially in today's game with more spacing and obviously coveting versatile small ball force.
I think that is spot on, both in terms of the I'm not sure I'm co-signing all-star, but the gains he's made as a shooter and how good he is going to be in NBA spacing, that is spot on. Fellas, as always, thank you for joining us this week. We'll see you again next week. That's it for another episode of College Basketball Recruiting Weekly. A very sincere thank you to everyone who joined us here. And as a reminder, visit us at 247sports.com, especially if you're interested in the type of stuff we were talking about here today. Travis has a big board out looking forward to the 2023 NBA draft, and I went back to the 2022 draft and graded in the totality every lottery pick. We hope to see you at 247sports.com and again next week here on College Basketball Recruiting Weekly.